what? I've played to small houses. It's no problem.
Oh, okay. No, now it's live. We've got all the attendees. Hi, attendees. So, there we go. Yeah. So.
Great.
Okay.
Welcome.
Welcome, everybody.
Welcome to Brome Lake Books. How's your weather?
Our weather's spectacular right now. Yeah.
Nice.
And yeah, it's and Patricia, you're in Toronto?
I'm in the country just east of Toronto.
Oh, lovely. Okay.
All my tomatoes froze last night.
Oh, ditto. Yeah, we had our first frost, major frost last night. So
yeah, really.
Quite quite disconcerting.
It was.
Yeah.
I have to Google what to do with frozen green tomatoes now.
Oh, yeah, my husband, the same thing. So I'm just going to. Oh, wonderful. Hi, everybody. As we're just about to start, I see it's 6:59. I'm going to let you know at the end of this event, we're going to be having a question and answer period. And during the question and answer period, the authors have asked that they can see the person who's asking the question. So I will be turning on your cameras. If you would like to ask a question, at the bottom of your screen, you should be able to see a bubble saying Q&A. And anytime during this event, you can just click on the Q&A and ask the question. And
if you want to ask a question and be anonymous, I think that's okay too.
Absolutely. Yeah, just let me know if you want to be anonymous. And if you want to chat amongst each other, please feel free to do that as well. And you can raise hands and wave. And so I'm ready to start. So I'm going to be reading this bit.
Okay.
My name is Lucy Hoblin, and I would like to welcome you to Brome Lake Books and to this evening's virtual launch of John Allore and Patricia Pearson's book, Wish You Were Here. I would like to thank Penguin Random House and especially Danielle and Anika for their help with the publicity and promotion of this event. Before I hand this evening over to John and Patricia, I would like to say a little bit about them. John Allore is a graduate of Trinity College, the University of Toronto, and holds a master's in public administration with a specialization in justice administration from North Carolina State University. He's the creator and host of the podcast, Who Killed Teresa, which concentrates on unsolved murders in Quebec and other criminal social justice issues. He launched one of the first crime blogs, and the website, teresaallore.com, not only documents the search for his sister's killer, but a trove of information on other unsolved cases in Canada and the US. For years, John lobbied for the creation of a Sûreté de Québec cold case unit. In 2004, the squad was created with a mandate to solve over 600 cases under its jurisdiction. He's a founding board member of the Association des Familles des Personnes Assassinées ou Disparues. In 2018, he was awarded the Senate of Canada's Sesquicentennial Medal for his work in victims advocacy. He lives with his family in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Patricia Pearson is the author of 6 books and a critically acclaimed journalist whose work appeared in the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Daily Beast, the Daily Telegraph, the Globe and Mail, and more. Her book about people, what people experience when they die, Opening Heaven's Door, was a finalist for the BC National Book Award. She has also won 3 National Magazine Awards and the Arthur Ellis Award for Best Nonfiction Crime Book of 1998. On November 3rd, 1978, 14-year-old John's life changed forever with the disappearance of his sister from Champlain, Lennoxville. 6 months later, her body was found a few kilometers away. I'm pleased to introduce to you John and Patricia. John, what brought you two together to write this book?
Oh boy, that is a great question. And if Patricia's game, I'd like to punt it to her. I think, well, it's your story and I'd rather you tell it. I mean, and what I'm specifically referring to is 3 years ago when you were at Penguin Random House. And
What was I doing 3 years ago, Penguin Random House?
you had a conversation with Craig.
Well, I will take it back a little bit further. What brought John and I together first was a teenage romance. So that I was dating him the year after his sister was found. And I didn't really understand what that actually meant. And John's own family didn't really understand what had happened because the police wrote it off as a drug overdose. So then I went on my own way and became a crime journalist, and John went on his way and bought a new house in North Carolina with his wife, where the police came to the door and said, we think there might be a 19-year-old girl's body buried in your basement, and we'd like to bring in sniffer dogs. And that spun John around in ways that he can talk about, but it brought him back to me, asking me the question, now that I had done crime journalism, did I actually think that his own 19-year-old sister had died of a drug overdose? And that began an investigation that the two of us have done, partly with me kickstarting things for John with my crime background, and then him using his genius of investigation and his persistence and his personal obsession to keep winnowing away at this question until we found ourselves 3 years ago talking to Random House. And what story are you thinking of, John? What happened with the Amber Alert?
For the book, I really think what kind of catapulted it is I had gone to what was then Penguin and Random House, 2 separate houses in Toronto, about 15 years ago, with a proposal for a book. And at that time, they were like, well, this is interesting, but it feels unresolved. Why don't you come back to us when you solve the murder? Which was sort of like, and it was kind of like, well, that's not really the point of the book. And, you know, we kind of like things left unanswered. So then 3 years ago, Patricia was meeting with the editor who I had met with that time and said, oh, hey, you remember that guy, John Allure? And he goes, yeah. Craig goes, yeah, I remember. She goes, he thinks he solved the murder. And my recollection of you telling this, Patricia, was that he said, wait a minute, that guy is still pursuing this thing 15 years later? And then he said, that's the book I want. Forget about solving the murder. I want that book. And I think that was, for me, as I recollect it, what propelled us specifically on this project. Did I get it right?
Well, everyone has their own memory of how things unfold. That sounds good.
I understand that you have some passages that you would like to read from the book, and if you would like to just talk about a little bit about the book ahead of time, that would be brilliant.
Sure. So we thought what we'd do is read two short passages. We'd split the first one and share it. We're gonna read the opening of the book and share that, and then we can stop and talk or questions, whatever, and then we'll go on from there. But we thought we'd begin at the beginning. Seems like a good place to start. Start at the very beginning and go from there, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
I would also say, you know, a murdered girl, a brother's quest, the search for a serial killer, you know, that's marketing. And I would say that the book is a whole lot more than that, as people will see. I mean, I'm certainly getting a lot of people already jumping the gun and coming to me and saying, I hope you'll get closure. I hope you have peace. I hope the police solve. And while all of that's nice, that's not anything that is really required at this point. So I'll just kind of leave it at that and get going. Sound fun?
Absolutely.
So before getting to the epilogue or the prologue, I'm going to prologue the prologue. And I'm going to read you something from the Sherbrooke Record that was released 43 years ago this week. This came out, and this is not in the book. This is usually the way things happen for me. I go looking for something and then I find something else. And I found this and I found it pretty interesting. So I'm just going to read this short article, notice really, that appeared in the Sherbrooke Record in September 1978. And it says, police patrol schools. Vigilance. After 3 incidents of indecent exposure, the Lennoxville police have set up surveillance of local schools. They are investigating any suspicious cars or persons in the area. Chief Hamill suggests parents teach their children these rules. Stay away from strangers offering candy or rides in their car. Report anybody who acts strangely to you or their teacher immediately. Copy down the license plate number of any car they think is suspicious. If your child is involved in an incident, don't panic. Call the police. Listen to all your child has to say and don't get angry. It's not the child's fault. He or she's the victim. You can help by keeping a close watch in your area and keep your notepad ready. That 43 years ago this week. And with that, I'm going to start with the prologue. And if I mess it up somewhere, I may stop and start again. That's just the way these things go. 10 o'clock in the morning, Friday, April 13th, 1979. For the many Catholic residents of Quebec, it is Good Friday, a day to ritually lament the death of the Messiah. Sorrow then yields to joy. Easter is coming, and so is the hesitant spring. Water trickles through lacy matrices of ice. Mud squelches beneath boots. Plump red robins align in the branches of maple and oak trees. In the southern reaches of the province, above the Vermont border, a 30-year-old man named Robert Ride goes about his annual spring routine of setting and baiting muskrat traps before joining his family for lunch. The furry rodents are abundant in marshy areas, fond of still or slow-moving water. Ride has been at it all morning, tucking small wire traps into the banks of the gentle Massawippi and Quaticook rivers as winter softens its grip on their soils. In his pickup truck, he travels south from the town of Waterville to the village of Compton Station, which consists of little more than a grain elevator. From there, he heads east en chemin de la station to the floor of the Quaticook Valley and pulls over near the entrance to a farm. In the summer and fall, the muskrats here nibble on the corn stalks adjacent to the shores of the Quaticook, then burrow into the silted banks. Ride sets more traps and continues another 50 meters down the road, slowing his truck just before a small service bridge. Another good spot. There is a pond formed by the spring runoff draining from the fields. The rains have fallen hard this April. Ride climbs over the guardrail and slide walks down the steep embankment. Doesn't carry supplies. He's trapped here before and leaves a stash of materials in the underbrush next to the pond. He walks a short distance from the road toward a large oak tree. To his left is the cornfield with a farmhouse off in the distance. To his right are the edges of the pond with the village of Compton that away eastward, a kilometer or so. Ride retrieves the cord of wire he uses for trapping from the base of the oak tree. He can see tiny paw prints in the mud. He begins to set the traps. About 30 meters back from the road, Ride stops. A tree branch has broken off during the winter storm and collapsed down the bank. Trying to figure out a way around the large limb, Ride glances to the right and sees something in the water, tangled amongst the fallen branches. It's a mannequin lying face down. The skin is gray. The hair is matted. It's clothed only in a bra and underwear. He is confounded. Right some Jesus queer? Who would toss a department store mannequin into a cornfield in the middle of nowhere? Some pranking kids. Leaning closer, he grapples with a more astonishing discovery. He is looking at a person, a dead woman. A woman died here and wasn't buried. She lies here in perfect stillness, without warm clothes on, accompanied by frost and muskrats and rain. For 30 years, Robert Ride would be so disturbed by this wrongness, this sense of defilement against all that is sacred, that he believed the police would blame him, that by merely witnessing her here, it was, or should be, somehow his fault.
Wow. That was...
Sorry, I'm just going to add, go through the rest of it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Okay. By noon, the pond had become a crime scene. Detectives Roche Goudreau and Guy Lessard of the Sûreté de Quebec Eastern Townships Division stumped through the mud and cornstalks, accompanied by Coroner Michel Durand and a mobile forensics unit. SQ agent Normand Gregoire took photographs and drew a map. The bridge was precisely 17.8 meters long and 8.6 meters wide. Halfway between the bridge and the farm entrance, he sketched a tractor entrance that allowed access to the cornfield. The body lay exactly 34 meters back from the bridge and 38 meters from the tractor entrance on a straight trajectory. She had walked or been dragged from the road. Detectives broke into teams to search the field. They came across a green garbage bag in which they found women's clothing, including a pink sweater. In the cornfield, they found 2 torn pieces of a knee-length green scarf. One piece lay 15.3 meters from the tractor entrance. The other lay 16.4 meters farther away and 25.3 meters from the body. A tractor entrance, a dropped scarf, a second scattered piece of scarf, and all of it along the same curving trajectory towards a body lying face down in 10 inches of spring runoff. There was a watch on her left wrist and a ring on her left forefinger. She wore earrings. There were, Coroner Durand observed and wrote down, what appeared to be marks of strangulation around her neck. The coroner noted additional bruise marks under both armpits, suggesting that she had still been alive, if unconscious or dying, when she was dragged through the field. It was, he estimated, the body of a girl between 17 and 18, about 5'5" and weighing around 120 pounds. These details roughly corresponded with the age, height, and weight of Teresa Allure, who had gone missing from her college residence in Compton on November 3rd, 1978. That would need to be confirmed. As the body was whisked to the morgue in the nearby city of Sherbrooke, investigators tried to track down Teresa's brother, Andre, who also attended Champlain College. But he was away for Easter, as were her close friends. So the Sûreté de Québec corralled 3 nervous students who barely knew her to gaze wincingly at the remains. Abruptly confronted with a water-soaked, decomposed corpse, the teenagers couldn't say they didn't know. Finally, toward the supper hour, Corporal Goudreau located Teresa's father, who was visiting family in the small Ontario town in which his daughter had been born 19 years earlier, Trenton, a 2-hour drive east of Toronto along the shore of Lake Ontario. The detective told Bob Allure they'd found a body and thought it was his daughter. Goudreau described the watch and the ring, the earrings. He didn't mention the strangulation marks. He never would, nor would any police officer. He asked Mr. Allure to travel immediately to Montreal, where an autopsy would be performed once he had identified his only daughter. So began one loving, thoughtful family's descent into hell. There would be no resurrection this Easter, only a story that would take 40 years to unravel and tell.
Wow. As it seems like a completely fictional introduction to a fiction, and yet this is a true story, and it absolutely amazing way, sort of heart-wrenching way of the beginning of this incredible story, this incredible journey that you have been on, John. And
Yeah, I just want to actually say there, John. You know, that was it was a tough decision as a writer to decide when you're working with somebody and you're talking about the death of their sister, and you have to describe it, but you have to be, and then you're thinking, but I'm describing the corpse of his sister.
mm-hmm.
So, and remember, John, at first I tried describing just what a raccoon looked like when it was decomposed in the water near the farmhouse I live in, because I thought if I could get at the subject sidelong a bit, what does a body look like in the water, but it's just the raccoon I'm seeing, not John's sister Teresa, then maybe it would be less disturbing for him. But he's been incredibly good about allowing these decisions to be made for the sake of really getting people to understand the profundity of the impact on the family.
Yeah.
And also I think, I mean, you could make the case that there's no other way to open the story, but there's all kinds of ways to open it. And this seemed like the best way. Although, a lot of true crime, and you can call it, you said it's almost, like a novel or a movie or something like that. A lot of true crime opens this way, and we're certainly aware of that. That's nothing that we weren't aware that we were playing with, a tradition in that sense. But the account of Robert Ride, that's exactly the way Robert Ride told it to me. I met him on Chemin de la Station in his pickup truck, and he took me to the site, and he walked me through, what he saw. So that account is very much from my notes and his description of what he saw that day, and how he how he reflected on the event is also very true.
Mm-hmm. And what prompted you to start looking into your sister's murder 20 years later? What sort of brought that about?
Well, I mean, Patricia alluded to it earlier. I mean, I did buy a house where the local police thought there had a murder. Not that the murder had committed. Well, it might have been committed there, but certainly that a body had been stored in the crawl space under the house. Of that they were certain. So that was a very unnerving prospect, particularly given that I had been a vagabond, a gypsy, a transient. I'd been accused of that by my own family, having shuffled around from the Maritimes to Montreal to Toronto, then in the United States, in New York City, Los Angeles, finally settling in Chapel Hill. And when and I guess the irony of it, you could say, was when I finally decided, that was the first home my then wife and I, Elizabeth and I, scraped the money together to purchase. And the book goes into it more, but it was a fixer-upper, to say the least. And I spent before we moved in a good 6 weeks, grouting the bathrooms and ripping everything out because it was in shambles, in solitude, right? Not knowing any of this had gone on, or potentially had possibly gone on, that there had been a murder here. So when the police showed up at the doorstep one day to disclose this, it seemed like, of all the things, you shuffle around half your life and you finally decide to make roots, and the one place you decide to make roots and for some stability has this event associated with it. So that was a sign. And I think also the vulnerability, at that same time, my then eldest daughter, was 1 or 2. And we had another daughter on the way. So it was very, very much a period of vulnerability, of extreme vulnerability. And I mean, I'm not a psychologist or anything, but I would venture to say that it triggered some things.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah. And from your investigations, you then found out that there were many more unsolved murders of ladies and teenage girls in Quebec that were committed in the 1970s. Can you tell me a bit more about how your investigations found out about these various murders?
Sure. So initially, 18 years ago, the product of all this was a series of 3 articles that Patricia wrote for the National Post called "Who Killed Teresa," which focused on 3 murders, 2 additional, including my sister Teresa's. Manon Dubé, who had shown up dead in the winter, February, March of '78. And then, of course, the very evident murder of Louise Cameron in 1977, very close to where you are. Not exactly in Austin, but just north of Austin, between Austin and Magog, along the Chemin de Fer, and was where the body was found. So those 3 initially, and then was a period of investigating commonalities in other murders from, I'd say, 77 to 1980. And it became less and less. I mean, a lot of people get on me, misinterpret what I'm doing. It's like, John thinks there's a serial killer responsible for all these murders. And that's not what I'm about. I think they all share the same element of criminal investigative failures by the Quebec Investigative Police Force. That's the link, where there's a commonality of bad investigation and particularly of evidence destruction, of physical evidence destruction. That's the thing. And, if somebody, I'll just add this, if somebody thinks that, my process of dealing with my sister's murder at this point is kind of cold and removed, I would temper that by saying it's because I've seen so many other murders that are just the same. So it's hard for me to sit here in my corner and cry tears of grief about my sister's murder. I mean, it was such a long time ago that I really don't feel that way anymore. I mean, it feels a part of me. It does not feel, I don't sit here, pining for some kind of false resolution or anything like that. Plus, there's all these other people, families, this sphere of destruction that is just the same. And quite frankly, I feel the same way about all of them.
Yeah. We have a question from somebody here. Okay. Would you like to answer it now, or would you like to read? Yeah. Okay. So let me see if I can find Janet. Janet, I'm going to just promote you a second. I hope. This might not work.
I think she just needs to be unmuted.
Yeah. Oh yeah, there she is. Okay. Awesome.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. I guess I'm not on mute anymore.
No, we can hear you.
Fine.
No, I had put in a question. I live down the street from the Champlain residences, and I did not realize that there was a residence in Compton. Was that before I thought the residences were built here at the same time as Champlain College was open. I'm just wondering why she was in a residence in Compton.
So those, you're talking about the residences behind the golf course, I believe, or just, yeah, yeah. So no, I mean, that was the big dilemma was, I think the Cégep was open, in the early 70s, and they didn't have enough spots to put all of the students.
Okay.
So they worked up this solution of temporary housing. The Compton residence at King's Hall was a private girls' school.
Oh, so that's what I thought that might be it. Yeah.
Right. That had since amalgamated with Bishop's School,
Right.
just across the river there. And so they quickly, kind of slabberdashed that together. And it was only supposed to be for 1 year. But the construction got delayed on the residences you're referring to, and were not opened. They were supposed to be opened in 78. They were not opened until 1979. The irony of this is within weeks of the notification of Teresa's body being found, that the second notice in the Sherbrooke record, or the touchstone, was that residences are finally open. We have our new residences. Only too late for her.
Right. Yeah, because Compton is a fair distance away from Champlain College, so it was quite a ways for these girls to have to travel. I also know Robert Ride.
Ah.
I grew up with him, and I've been away for a long time, and I did not know that he was the one who found the system.
Yes.
Yeah.
Patricia, do you want to add anything about the distance and the busing, or?
I just want to add that one of the things that we looked at in the book is I was able to interview some women who had been students at the Compton residence and who had been subjected to sexual assault as a result of the isolation of them going up and down this highway and having to hitchhike because there weren't enough shuttle buses going up to Champlain College. So they were put into a kind of highway of tears situation, and they were very young women, 17 years old, 16, 18, who were going back and forth this long, quite dark road, often trying to hitch a ride because they would miss a shuttle bus. And so in some ways, the reaction of Champlain College to what happened to Teresa and the way that they circled the wagons at the time and were defensive and not therefore very helpful to the family was, I think, because they knew on some level that they had put all of these girls at risk. But rather than admit that, they dug in and kind of further injured everybody by saying, it didn't happen, that these things weren't happening when they were happening.
Interesting. Did you ever consider taking any kind of legal action against the Champlain College because of this?
Well, not me, but I know my parents considered it. I know the school was threatened by it.
Right.
I remember Serge Gosselin in the Tribune said the Allures are going to sue. Now, the reason I know that is because my dad wrote that down on a piece of paper, was that he phoned him, and my dad wrote Serge Gosselin, the Allures are going to sue. My mother very wisely talked my father out of that. Thought that it would lead nowhere. It could probably lead us penniless. And there was that it would drag our family through the mud. This was a different time. Now, I don't mind being, you can call me any name you want, right? But I live in the seclusion and isolation of the United States. So there's a nice buffer there that allows me to be quite objective about these things. And it's also a different era. You were talking the 1970s then. the idea of your reputation and your name was a different thing than today.
Yeah, we're much more open about it today, but
Thank you, Janet.
Thank you.
Okay. I understand you have another section that you would like to read.
I do.
Yes.
I was going to read it. It's so this is from a chapter called "The Green and the Blue," and one of the questions we wanted to ask and have answered was if the Eastern Townships Police at that time seemed somewhat disengaged, disinterested in solving the murders of these three young women, then what were they engaged with? What was occupying their time? And this chapter deals with two events from that time that some of you may remember, maybe not. But I'm going to deal with this bit here deals with the second event. This is a little pithy, so we'll get through it. The second case preoccupying Township's law enforcement around the time of Teresa's disappearance offers glimpses of dubious and distracted police work as well. It had to do with some bottom feeders in the Sherbrooke underworld, petty thieves and drug dealers who were often recruited by the SQ to act as informants on higher-ups in Quebec's rampant biker gangs. On July 6, 1978, the bodies of Raymond Grimard and Manon Bergeron were found in a field south of Lennoxville. Grimard had been shot several times in the back of the head. Bergeron, a young mother of three small children, had a nylon cord wound around her neck. She'd also been beaten or knocked out with the butt of a rifle. A resident near the crime scene said she heard a car cruising rapidly in both directions and the blowing of its horn twice around 4 o'clock that Thursday morning. There was no further mention of this case in any local newspaper until the trial began in April of 1979. And I remind you that Teresa's body was found in April of 79. A local man named Fernand Laplante, young and unemployed, had been arrested and now stood trial for 2 counts of murder. SQ officer Raël Chateauneuf, one of the men assigned to Teresa's case, testified that he had been keeping the accused, Laplante, under surveillance the previous summer, after receiving a tip that the aspiring thief was planning to rob a bank. Chateauneuf, accompanied by Noël Bolduc and Roch Goudreau, had arrived at the scene of the murders and found a piece of paper on Grimard's body with the phone number of the Sherbrooke SQ office written on it. The assertion at trial then was that Grimard was a suspected stooge and that Laplante had grown paranoid and whacked him. The star witness for the prosecution was 22-year-old Jean Charland, who claimed to be Laplante's accomplice. The 2 men, he said, had been planning to rob a bank with Grimard. They began suspecting him of tipping off the cops. On the night of the crime, Charland said he waited in a car while the accused escorted Grimard and Manon Bergeron into a field, shot Grimard, then strangled Bergeron. Charland honked the car horn at Laplante's request to cover the sounds of the gunshots. They then threw the rifle into a nearby river, abandoned their car at the Lennoxville golf course, and took a taxi back to Sherbrooke. Fernand Laplante was defended by Jean-Pierre Rancourt, the same attorney who had collapsed the Charles Marion prosecution the previous year. Rancourt told the jury that Charland worked in drug trafficking with the Gitane motorcycle gang, carrying out contract robberies and arsons. He was hardly a credible witness. Further, during cross-examination, the lawyer got Officer Chateauneuf to concede that when the SQ brought their potential star witness into custody on November 11th, 1978, they lied to him by pretending that Laplante had incriminated him in the summer murder of a young woman named Carol Fecteau, who had been found naked by a stream near the village of East Hereford. The young thugs all pointed fingers in that case, gossiping at one point over a game of snooker in a Wellington Street bar about how she'd been given a good go or gang raped before being shot. Fecteau, the cops knew, had been friends with Charland's brother, so they lied and pretended that Laplante had something on him. Was the message here frame or be framed? Asked if this type of deception was normal practice for the SQ, Chateauneuf replied, "Yes, it's one of the tricks usually used." Another witness, who was serving time for robbery, testified that Chateauneuf and a second SQ officer had urged him to testify against Laplante, warning him that if he instead testified for the defense, his parole would, quote, go badly. 3 more convicts alleged that they too had been intimidated by the investigating officers. One of the witnesses said, "I really don't have anything against the cops. They're only doing their job, but sometimes I have to admit doing their job includes some kicks and punches." Remarkably, no one in the media covering that trial seems to have raised an obvious question. Why was Carol Fecteau killed? And then why was Manon Bergeron killed? Why murder this young single mother who seemed to have a purely social affiliation with the gang, in addition to supposed informant Grimard? What did she do? For that matter, why strangle her, which is a much more intimate kind of attack, not to mention one that takes a great deal longer to complete than shots with a rifle? Bergeron was almost never mentioned in the daily reporting, and Fecteau's death barely registered. No one was ever convicted for her murder. The erasure in retrospect is astounding. Finally, taxi driver William Pettigrew told the court that he drove Charland and an unidentified man back to South Sherbrooke intersection of Short and Belvedere streets at around dawn on the day of the crime. It's curious to note that Carol Fecteau had lived in an apartment in this area. The second man on this ride, the driver recalled, had tattoos on both arms. Fernand Laplante rose to show the jury that he had no such markings. Attorney Rancourt speculated in closing arguments that Charland was protecting someone by agreeing to testify and spin the story the way he had. Indeed, he later successfully appealed his conviction and stated that contrary to having witnessed the murders, he'd heard about what had happened in a local bar. For reasons lost now to the decades, however, the jury figured that young Fernand Laplante committed the murders. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole, although to this day he maintains his innocence. I tried to talk to him once he was released to get some background on the criminal world in Sherbrooke in the late 1970s, but Laplante wanted to put all of that behind him. At this second high-profile trial, it's worth noting that private investigator Robert Bulak decided he'd seen enough of shady townships police work. As a note, Robert Bullock was a private investigator hired by my family. The following summer, Bullock filed a complaint with the Quebec Police Commission alleging that provincial police officers had beaten suspects, intimidated witnesses, and fabricated evidence during investigations of crimes in and around the city of Sherbrooke. He accused them of using threats against witnesses in the kidnapping trial of Claude Valence. Years later, Bullock would tell me that both Valence and Laplante had suffered the, quote, phone book trick. The problem is that provincial police in the Sherbrooke area cannot solve cases by the normal methods, Bullock told the press at the time. So they have to start using shortcuts. That seemed to be a little bit of an understatement. Finally, Bullock demanded that Justice Minister Marc-André Bedard probe what he called gross misconduct in the handling of the Fernand Laplante case. Bullock's demand was ignored. Sherbrooke in those days was wild, a local law enforcement officer would tell us. I always called it my Chinatown. The SQ were dirty cops. They were very sloppy. These are people who don't want to be challenged. They were a special group, let's just put it that way. If only my parents had known at this time what that was, they might not have bristled with upset and confused anger when Teresa's grieving friends came to her funeral. These young, loving friends who served distracted cops as convenient suspects for an unimportant crime. There's a bit of history you may not know.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I must say that I have not read the book yet, but I am absolutely dying to read it, and especially after the research that I have done for this evening's presentation and that story. Yes. Anyway.
No, it's fine. The phone book trick, incidentally, what that is in the day you could do either. If you were interrogating someone, you'd either beat them with a thick phone book, or you'd hold the phone book up against their head and you'd beat the phone book with a stick. That was the phone book trick that was alleged to have used on Valence from the Marion case and Fernand Laplante. Fernand Laplante alleged that he lost the hearing in his ear due to the phone book trick that was implemented on him by the Sûreté de Québec.
Wow. I have a few people who have some questions for you. I'm going to start with Richard Menard.
Richie Rich.
Okay, where are you, Richard? Ah, there you are. And I'm just going to unmute and ask. So, Richard, if you could unmute yourself and turn on your camera, we would love.
I think
love
Richard
to hear
doesn't want to be. I think he's the one who said no camera, which is
no,
fine.
no camera. Okay. Would you mind unmuting yourself? While we're waiting for him, I have another person who. There you go.
Hi, Richard.
Hey, John, how's it going?
Good, thank you.
Was there any request for a provincial or federal inquiry into all of this? I've seen a lot of posts about the murders on the South Shore and all the way through to Sherbrooke. Was there anything politically done to draw some attention to this?
So I think about 5 years ago, I put my name to a list. A bunch of us think 12 to 20, went to the Justice Minister, Minister of Public Safety, with a demand for a public inquiry. I didn't aggressively push it, but I didn't mind lending support to the group that wanted to pursue it. My feeling about public inquiries is, I'd say, has evolved over the years. Yeah, we've had a lot of them in Quebec, from Malouf inquiry into the Charbonneau Commission, both of those. Malouf in the 70s with the Olympics, and the Charbonneau, both construction. Of course, the Poitras Commission, which investigated the Maddox affair into organized crime. Particularly with the Maddox affair, I think the lesson for me there was, it cost the taxpayers millions and millions of dollars, and gave a black eye to the Sûreté de Québec. Most certainly, I think that report has over 95 recommendations for reform. Of course, the one thing that is always called for in these things is a police oversight commission of citizens, of non-sworn, which the police always are reluctant to provide. And my thoughts on what was the biggest public inquiry into the Sûreté de Québec, the Poitras report, was that it was much ado about nothing. Well, no, it was much ado about something, but that it didn't achieve the results that were expected. Put it that way.
If I'm still, was there a huge disconnect between the MUC police and the Sûreté de Québec at that time?
Yes, and the book goes into that.
Don't spoil it.
Certainly the friction between, I don't know, Patricia, you can chime in here if you want, but what was going on at that time was the consolidation of police forces. So you had the in November 76, the Parti Québécois gets into power, and immediately beginning in 77, what they start to do is they start to withhold grant money from local municipalities. And a lot of these municipalities are saying, wait a minute, we rely on that grant money for a lot of municipal services, including our police services. And so a lot of police forces shut down. There was a wildcat strike in Sherbrooke, 77, 78, that lasted, an illegal wildcat strike that lasted a week. And slowly a lot of those forces began to consolidate, began to come under so that's why in a lot of places you have an SQ force and not a local force. I think that, the ones that hung on were Sherbrooke, Magog, but a lot of them, they've all returned, but at that time the SQ was consolidating power and becoming a force unto its own, to the point even where the PQ went so far as to threaten to kick the RCMP out of Quebec. Not that they have a lot of influence in Quebec anyway. I think they're quite glad to stay out of the SQ's business. But yes, it was a period of mass consolidation of power from the Quebec Police Provincial Force.
I have a question now from Tracy Wing. I'm going to unmute her. And
hi.
Hi, Tracy.
Hi. I have a few questions, but my first question is, you said that it took 20 years for you. I don't know if it was to realize that it was a murder, or because you talked about the police saying that she died of a drug overdose. like from when she died to when you started investigating her murder, what were your thoughts? What were your family's beliefs? Because when you don't know, you don't know.
Yeah, so this was cloistered and Byzantine, you know, particularly for a 14-year-old boy. You know, I wasn't allowed to see the documents. You know, I knew that my father had like a pretty thick file in a file cabinet, you know, in his home office of, of what I now know were his notes, an autopsy report, a coroner's report, you know, several documents. But I was never going to work up the I don't think it's courage. I don't know what it is. Yeah, I was never going to ask the question for that, you know, at that age. And it's hard to question authority. You know, you know this. We want to believe in a police force. We want to believe we have the best education. There's number two. And the third, it's not a part of this story, but we want to believe that the medical profession is absolutely getting everything they need. Those are the three rocks that we rely on: education, medical services, law enforcement. And it takes a lot to crack that wall. I'll say that.
And my follow-up question would be, like I went to Champlain College in 1989, and never once was this mentioned, was Teresa ever mentioned whether it's to educate us women. You know, I'm a firm believer that those three that you mentioned, they don't care about women or children, that we're kind of the other society, and that when bad things happen to us, we'd rather, you know, put it aside. So, you know, because the school was complicit in its silence, and you know, there were other sexual assaults that were happening at the time. And so just your thoughts, and if you think that anything has changed, you know, since in 40 years.
Yeah, town and gown, huh? I mean, town and gown, and I think the best way I can, you know, I'll use a parallel because I live in Carborough, which is adjacent to Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Chapel Hill is the area is rife with educational institutions, but the town and gown relationship between the University of Chapel Hill in North Carolina, and the town is relying on this for everything from tax revenues to tuition and all these kind of things. And take the current pandemic out of it. I'm talking normal circumstances. So when a young woman named Eve Carson showed up dead of a shotgun wound, you know, who was the valedictorian, one of the most popular young girls at the University of Chapel Hill, and shotgun wounds, you know, a mile from the college. You know, college wanted nothing to do with this. Absolutely nothing to do with this. It's a bring down. You're a drag. You're a bad trip. You know, people won't come to this school because of Eve Carson. You're bringing down property values. I'm like, the only reason I can be in Knowlton tonight, thank you, Lucy, is because it's the one town we don't hit with a daisy cutter. We hit all the others: East Hereford, Ayers Cliff, Magog, Lennoxville, Quaticook. You know, we go the gamut. And it's like, would that allure guy please stop bringing, I mean, I get it. I get it. Those are my thoughts.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, I wanted to add that my two sons have attended Champlain last year or 2 years ago, and they were just about to put up lights between for walk between new residents and Champlain. And they were still having to walk between those two, a 20-minute walk in the dark through woods every night to get back to their residences. And this is the residences right in town. And it was very particularly scary for the girls. And of course, you know, so they only just put up lights last year or a year and a half ago. I think I'm correct in saying, yeah. So I'm now asking Robert Lane to, here's Robert Lane.
Robert Lane is a dear friend. Hi, Bob.
Hi, I was just wondering what time the Trapped in Paradise table read starts. So congratulations on the book. I haven't yet read it, but congratulations on it being the only book that doesn't feature, you know, what's his name. But I guess for both of you, I know quite a lot about the last 20 years, and owing to what a fan of Elroy you are, I wonder how much in the compiling and writing of the book, the subject of blind alleys came up. Bad tips, things that lead you down rabbit holes, and if anything came up during the writing of the book in that fashion.
Yeah, as you know, I am a big fan of James Elroy. I mean, I'll just leave it at that. I'm a big fan of James Elroy. I'm a big fan of My Dark Places, which is his memoir about the murder of his mother. And for me, that, in terms of, there's a lot of great pieces of true crime out there, but that's, I mean, between him and the writer who writes about Vietnam, Tim O'Brien, those for me are the guys that influence me. Blind Alleys, and Patricia, I'll have you think about this too. Yeah, all the time, wild goose chases and stuff that you know you're sent on. You know, even initially, I remember, you know, we were advised by Kim Rosmo, the geographic profiler Kim Rosmo, very, very early on, to don't chase suspects, to chase the information. And of course we didn't. We immediately focused on somebody, I just say, who was he was a teacher at Champlain, and we're convinced that it was him, even to the point where, like, we're drawing glasses on him because we thought the guy, you know, if this guy has glasses, then he's the guy. I mean, it was absurd, you know, and it turned out to be the wrong guy, but we spent a lot of energy on that, and, you know, you end feeling very, very foolish. Patricia, do you recall anything?
Well, I mean, I think that the elephant in the living room in that sense is the man that we actually focused quite a lot of the book on, which was perhaps something that was more interesting and ultimately to me than to John. And I flew out to Calgary and do feel very confident actually that the man that we identified who ultimately murdered several young women in Calgary did do that and is in fact a serial killer. But you know, what you're trying to balance all the time is, am I taking the place of an actual investigator in the collapse of that kind of institutional authority, or can I point in this direction, and then can I use this possibility, this potential blind alley that might nevertheless have some light in it because it illustrates larger things. So, you know, can we say with 100% certainty that this one Quebecois guy, Luc Gregoire, killed Teresa Lord? No. But can we say that by looking at his life and his parole records and everything we were able to find out about him, that he demonstrates all the ways in which the system fails? Yeah, we can do that. So you're always balancing those two things. And sometimes like John mentioned, the person with the tattoos that was seen in Sherbrooke, and we know that Luc Gregoire had tattoos all over his body, and so the temptation is, this is it, this is the guy, he also did, you know, so-and-so Bergeron's murder. And we're like, no, 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 we can't, you know, as soon as you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So yeah, the tension is constantly there between what is your job in the investigation, and how far can you take it, and how far is it worth taking for the people that you're doing it for? Who are you doing it for, right? Who are you trying to nail it for? So yeah.
And you're constantly challenged by confirmation bias.
Yeah, yeah.
As Patricia says, the temptation to put everything down that asserts and affirms what you believe, and to leave everything out that contradicts it. And
It gets exhausting after a while.
yeah, you just have to be vigilant with those things, and it gets exhausting. Yes.
Thank
So
you.
is it a book for the whole family, John? It's an Elroy joke.
Only yes. It is not a book for the whole family.
Thank you.
All right.
I'm now going to ask Lynn Morgan to ask a question.
Okay. Actually, I didn't have a question to ask. I just wanted to make a comment. Unfortunately, I just found out about the podcast by reading the Gazette today, so I hadn't had the opportunity to read the book. But I had listened to John's podcast, which I would like to recommend to people here this evening. It's an excellent podcast in which, you know, you speak of your sister's tragic death and about other disappearances as well. So I just wanted to say that I'm tremendously impressed by your work, that you've been able to turn your lemons into lemonade, basically, do something good in the world, you know, out of this tragedy. I also wanted to comment that I found the readings incredibly moving. I'm definitely planning to read the book. So thank you very much, Lucy, for organizing this evening, and, you know, John and Patricia for, you know, putting together this collaboration, and I'm really looking forward to reading your work.
Yes.
Thank you, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Chris, I have a question from Chris. Oh, he disappeared. Uh-oh. Oh, there he is. No, that's Lynn. Okay, sorry. Oh no, he's completely disappeared. Okay, his question, which I actually I'm very keen to ask you, is how do you feel about the current movement to defund the police?
Let me say this. I work in local government. Some people know that I've worked in finance and budgeting for the city of Durham, North Carolina for 20 years. And if I'm looking off in the distance right here, it's because I'm actually looking at my work computer. And I could physically right now go in to the cities of Durham's financial system and literally defund the police, take their budget and move it, all $60 million of it, to Parks and Rec, say. I could physically do that, and there's some people who would really want me to do that. But, you know, I've worked with the police in that respect, you know, all my life in North Carolina. And again, you know, it's a slippery slope because I happen to think our police force is a very, very good police force. I know the people. The officers in Durham live in Durham for the most part. They're part of the community. They are fathers, they are mothers, sons, all of those things we like to hear. But I would say I also know the games and the tricks, particularly financially and budget-wise, that they play. For instance, there was a time in Durham, and I'll speak about this now because it's not the case, but I got to know their criminal investigative force quite well because they knew I had written. Kim Rosmo wrote a book called Criminal Investigative Failures, which was really a practical hand guide for police forces. And they had found this book, and I had written a chapter with Patricia on it. And so they had gleaned this, and they wanted me to talk to them about this kind of stuff. And I quickly learned that nobody on that force in the investigative unit had ever been trained in criminal investigation. That to become a criminal investigator, a murder investigator, was simply a matter of being promoted. And it was something that you did in order to pad your salary. Never mind if you're qualified. We're just going to promote you and you'll figure it out along the way. That is no way to conduct a police force. But again, by parallel, I know that it happens with the SQ. I've sat there and I've listened to investigators parrot away stuff about investigation that they have no knowledge of, or if they do, they're taking credit for it themselves, and they're actually quoting like Eric Beauregard, a criminologist from Quebec, who we've worked with very, very closely over the years, and like trying to claim his work and all of this kind of thing. The police game it's a long-winded answer, and I apologize, but I'll answer your question. The police game is a game. I think they do need to be watchdogged. I think there could be some reallocation of resources to other public services without harm to public safety. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't believe the whole destructuring of the police. Some people want to go the entire route to total restorative justice. I don't really see how that would work, but those are my thoughts on it.
And we're going to take a final question from Thane Calder. If you would like to unmute and turn on your camera if you'd like.
Want me to do that? How do you do that?
Oh, oh, you've done it.
There we go. Sorry, I'm in the dark here. I feel mysterious in here. Good evening, folks. There we go.
Hello.
I'm actually here in Knowlton. I grew up in Lennoxville. Nice to meet you, John and Patricia. Congratulations on the book. I actually heard that the editor of the book is same editor as Jordan Peterson's books.
Yeah.
So I
Yes.
hope you have the same success in your sales. And stop. Just on the sales. But quite interesting. So growing up in Lennoxville, my father was on the town council in Lennoxville in charge of police and fire in the late 70s. My dates are all a little rough. And, you know, he was a volunteer council member and took it, you know, as seriously as he could. I think he was particularly excited by trying to modernize things at the time, and from what I've heard, and at least improve the equipment and things, because he said when he joined the force they had one car or something in the police force. Anyway, I actually, it's kind of crazy, and I followed your stuff, John, over the years. I went to, when I was probably, it might have been 2 years after the murder or so, on to the crime scene outside of Waterville near Compton there, with my dad and Leo ML at the time. And I wrote a note in the chat section, and mind you, my memory is very fuzzy. I was very young, and I was essentially along for the ride. I might have been 10 years old. I remember my mom being very upset that my dad brought me along to, I mean, at that point, all there was is the water and the trees. But when I jumped on the call earlier this evening, there was clearly some frustration with the police force. But my recollection was there was this chief of police who really cared. He might have not had the tools, he didn't have the means, but he seemed to care. he wanted to find answers to this. Now, so I don't know how you feel. I know, you know, trying is an effort is not good enough, but how do you land on that sort of, you know, just realities of maybe just then they didn't have the tools, the means,
Can I answer that, John?
But please do, but I'll just preface it by saying, I think we came to the same conclusion about Leo.
Yeah. And in fact, John tried to talk to him about a year ago. Remember, we phoned him, but he had heart trouble and he couldn't. It was too
Death
difficult for him to talk. But that was the impression that emerged for us, was that you have a local police officer who's overwhelmed by the task at hand, has no support for what he's trying to do, doesn't know where to turn or what to speculate on, and that he is essentially being disempowered and abandoned by the SQ, who takes over the investigation once Teresa's body is found. And you know, and so they kind of drag it away from Hamel, and then they turn it into a situation they just want to make go away. And they actually undermined him, because he was speculating, but John and I only found this out 40 years later, that he was actually speculating that it was the same killer as Louise Cameron had killed Teresa. And he was saying that aloud to the press, but the family never saw this. They never saw it in the press, and the SQ came out with a completely different theory about the drug overdose, almost right on top of Hamel. And Marilyn Allure used to say to John, his mother would say, that in the time that she knew Leo Hamel, his hair went from black to white.
That was 6 months.
In 6 months. Yeah, so.
I mean, it's, yeah. And so my memory's not fuzzy on that. I mean, this guy really cared. He wanted to, they just didn't have the tools that are, you know, I assume we have today, and the type of databases that we'd access. And anyway, well, thanks for, just want to validate that. And just, you know, it obviously as a 10-year-old, I mean, I didn't live what you did, John, but it still, you know, left a lasting imprint in my brain. Like, it's not every day. You usually go to hockey practice, right? Or something like that. So my mom was still very angry that he took me out on this. But anyway, congratulations on getting that book out. I think it's great that you guys did that.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.
So I just, before thanking you guys, I want to say that Brome Lake Books has a few events coming up, and you can find those upcoming events on our website, bromelakebooks.ca. We have Kenneth Opel and Joanna Goodman from HarperCollins. We're not going to mention them right now, but they're going to be doing some events. And also our Knowlton Literary Festival we've been recording some teaser webinars for this year, because unfortunately the Knowlton Literary Festival will not be happening this year. But all of the authors who had agreed so far will be coming next year. So we're going to be putting some teaser events on our website, knowltonliteraryfestival.ca, to tease you into attending next year's literary festival. And apart from that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. And I'd like to thank Penguin Random House again for their incredible help. They absolutely rock. Knowlton, Penguin Random House do. And but especially I'd like to say thank you to John and Patricia for joining us this evening.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lucy. It was really a pleasure.
Well, thank you. And Wish You Were Here goes on sale this Tuesday, September 22nd. And there are signed editions. Both John and Patricia have signed book plates, which is the thing to do this year. And we will be placing a book plate in each book. So thank you again to everybody, and good evening.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay.